Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we mentioned how Rimuru's God tier operation completely shocked both Guy and Velzard. Without exaggeration, Rimuru is the new god. Of course, even with Rimuru giving them hope, they couldn't afford to relax, not when the enemy was creator god Veldanava himself. After their discussion, Rimuru, Diablo, Guy, and Velzard headed together to the battlefield at the Heaven Tower. So, during this same period, how had the battle at the Heaven Tower progressed? In this episode, we shifted our perspective back to that battlefield. Because TenSura's depiction of this war advanced through 4 separate fronts, east, west, south, and north, each mostly shown through a single character's viewpoint, the overall narrative felt fragmented. So we will quickly go through the overall situation, and then focused on the perspectives of Ultima and Luminous. Although the Manus of Twilight Valentine, residing inside Velzard, had been erased by Carrera's judgment bullet, something no one expected happened. Twilight revived again. At the same time, Luminous, cornered with no hope of survival, finally awakened, recalling crucial memories tied to her own origin. So, let's get started. Luminous observed everything across the battlefield. Now that Everidge had transformed into Lucia, her overwhelming presence crushed the spirits of everyone present. Whether Velgrind or anyone else stepped forward, the odds of victory were bleak to the point of despair. Worse still, the 3 followers of Everidge at the other 3 battlefronts also transformed into humanoid forms, and their physiques changed dramatically. The largest and most imposing one was Kakeashi in male form, claws still intact. The smallest was Suiemu, whose gender was hard to discern, but whose face resembled that of a young girl. Habataki took on a female form with a well-proportioned, elegant figure. The 3 radiated a power far beyond reason. Even Luminous felt she would struggle to face any one of them. At the northern front, the battle against Habataki offered the first glimpse into the chaos. That battlefield was heavily populated with magic specialists, but Habataki possessed a truly despair-inducing ability, dimensional shift. In essence, it was teleportation with no distance, no charge time, and no warning. It could appear anywhere at will, launching sudden attacks. Its magic likewise ignored spatial targeting. Even masters like Gadra and Adalman were helpless, unable to lock onto a target that didn't need coordinates in the first place, as their defensive line was torn apart again and again. Then, just as their formation was about to collapse, Mai Furuki, who had returned with Yuki, and then teleported to this battlefield, stepped forward. She had no time to complain. She instantly analyzed the situation and made the correct judgment. Immobilized the enemy. She activated her ultimate skill, Lord of Cosmos, Terra Mater. This authority allowed her to interfere with space and coordinates. She disrupted the spatial wavelengths across the battlefield, corrupting the coordinate data Habataki needed for teleportation. Teleportation, though overpowered, demanded extreme calculation accuracy. Any deviation caused failure. By tampering with environmental data, Mai successfully downgraded Habataki from a dimension walker to a mere bird that could only fly. But even without teleportation, Habataki remained terrifying. A creature capable of flying at dozens of times the speed of sound, with wings made of ultimate metal high hero cane. Every dive could split armor like paper. The battle devolved into a brutal war of attrition. Gadra, despite regaining his youth, could only barely endure such physical onslaughts. Adalman, though now made of flesh and blood, had taken heavy damage. His shoulder was torn open. A moment passed where he felt being a skeleton had been better, though Venti strongly objected, since Venti preferred handsome men. Gritting through the pain, Adalman sustained wide-area healing magic, dragging comrades back from death's edge. Under his magic, Diablo's black lineage demons and the Bloody Knights, powered by their extraordinary vitality, kept throwing themselves into the gap, maintaining the line through sheer resolve. Then Adalman noticed a weakness. Habataki, though powerful, had almost no intelligence. Like a beast, it instinctively targeted moving enemies. So, a reckless plan was born. Mai Furuki would act as bait. Using her immense Magiculi count, she lured the monster's attention. At the last second before impact, she teleported away, causing Habataki to plunge straight into a prepared counterattack. It was suicide-level maneuvering, but Mai, selfless and always thinking of others, agreed without hesitation. The plan worked beautifully. Mai Furuki perfectly kited Habataki, the others eliminated the lesser monsters. Victory seemed within reach, and then despair fell again. Habataki's form suddenly evolved. It shed its beast-like body entirely, becoming a winged female figure with an elegant silhouette. Now its eyes gleamed with intelligence. This was no longer a beast that could be tricked with simple tactics. Facing an enemy with extreme intelligence, extreme physical power, and potentially regained spatial control, Mai knew the game was over. In her current condition, she couldn't last even a single minute. Now let's look at the Western Front. Kakeyashi had evolved. Once resembling a mutated wolf, it had barely taken on a humanoid form. The body was smaller, but the pressure was far more intense. Its combat ability had clearly skyrocketed. Naturally, the one primarily opposing it was Sheon, but the minor characters here were worth attention too. Sare used his life without hesitation, protecting one fragment of the holy field. Glenda, once a selfish woman who abandoned allies to survive, was now a blood-soaked warrior charging the front lines. Running was pointless. She devoted her dwindling life to maximizing the effect of every second. She was timing her survival around Luminous's revival spell cooldown, treating her own life as a consumable resource. This extreme pragmatism transformed her from a petty villain into one of the battlefield's toughest maniacs. Gregory, by contrast, was tragic. When Kakeyashi charged, Gregory activated his strongest defense, unique skill Katai Hito, steel body, and ran forward. But he wasn't delusional. He knew better than anyone that his proud defense was like paper to this enemy. His goal was heartbreakingly humble. If he could buy Sa'are just 2 more seconds, it would be enough. This was not a strong man's confidence. It was a weak man's sacrifice. Just as Kakeyashi's claws were about to rip Gregory's skull apart, an unexpected whirlwind of black struck the monster away. It was Gobta and Ranga, the golden duo. Ranga praised Gobta for predicting the attack, noting that Kakeyashi clearly wasn't accustomed to its new humanoid body. Why had Gobta known? Because it was the same weakness he himself showed when losing to Masayuki in the tournament. Gobta sensed that tremendous power placed inside an unfamiliar body was difficult to control, so Kakeyashi too would have openings. They waited patiently in the shadows, striking the moment that flaw appeared. With Ranga entering the fray, Kumara, who had been lurking and observing, was also forced to join the battle. Annoyed at being dragged in, she unleashed all accumulated irritation onto the enemy army. Her tail split into the 8 legions, slicing several Demon Lord Seed-class cryptids cleanly in half. Arriving at the southern battlefield, this was primordial Purple Ultima stage. Her opponent was Suiemu, the monstrous cosmic fish capable of destroying interstellar civilizations. This was not merely a giant octopus-like creature. It was a universe-level calamity that drifted between dimensions and galaxies. Suiemu possessed sub-light speed movement, the ability to freely open otherworld gates for spatial jumps, endlessly regenerating tentacles, and within its body it stored over 100 million spirit torpedoes capable of shattering planets. Its ultimate move, Quantum Splash, had erased countless star systems in the past. Even within the central world, its existence points rivaled that of true dragons. Facing such a monster, even Ultima felt the pressure. However, Ultima displayed the peak intelligence befitting a primordial demon. She knew she couldn't win through brute force, and Rimuru-sama's wish had always been to avoid casualties. So she devised a flawless stalling strategy. First was misdirection. She used transfer gates to manipulate Suiemu's movement path, trapping it within a fixed area. Then came reinforcement. She requested assistance from Velgrind on the Eastern Front and had her set up the 8-gate formation. Lastly, she toyed with it, Within this sealed space, Ultima created countless magicule clones as decoys, running Suiemu in circles. Like Adelman, she concluded the creature had almost no intelligence and relied solely on brute strength, making it predictable. And so, she turned a deadly battle into a leisurely game of hide-and-seek. But eventually, the humiliated Suiemu snapped. It unleashed its final trump card, Quantum Splash. The attack was powerful enough to destroy star systems, and Velgrin's 8-gate formation collapsed instantly. At that exact moment, Velgrin demonstrated why she was the pillar of the battlefield. Even from the faraway Eastern Front, she sensed the anomaly the instant the formation broke. Without hesitation, she twisted space itself, redirecting the main blast upward toward the Star Palace. It was a god-tier maneuver that saved the Holy Field from total annihilation. Meanwhile, Ultima issued an immediate warning, and her purple lineage, demons in the black numbers, quickly formed overlapping barriers, miraculously surviving an explosion capable of wiping out entire planets. When the blast faded, Suiemu evolved. It took the form of a long-haired girl. Though visually adorable, her murky eyes and writhing hair radiated an unsettling, eldritch aura. Her existence points skyrocketed, now more than 20 times Ultima's. And yet, at this moment, Ultima was far more terrifying. Her stylish military uniform was shredded in multiple places, pale skin covered in wounds. The injuries didn't bother her, but Suiemu had torn the precious uniform Rimuru-sama gifted her. That alone was unforgivable. Enraged, Ultima exuded a sinister aura so intense that Kurenai's reinforcements, who had just arrived, almost mistook her for an enemy. Thankfully, Hakuru was leading them. Otherwise, it could have ended in a friendly fire disaster. The newly evolved Suiemu possessed overwhelming energy, but it made a fatal mistake. It wasn't used to its humanoid body. It attempted an unrefined punch at Ultima, which she effortlessly deflected and countered. Ultima's martial prowess at this point had surpassed the Fist Saint Damrata. Facing an enemy 20 times her existence points, she asserted absolute dominance through pure technique. Switching to Luminous's perspective, she was unquestionably the commander of the entire battlefield. Amid the smoke-filled skies, Luminous danced a lonely, brutal dance. She concealed her physical and spiritual exhaustion, repeatedly casting the wide-area taboo spell, Sanctuary Resurrection. Ordinarily, this was considered madness. The issue wasn't merely magicule expenditure. To resurrect each fallen warrior precisely, Luminous borrowed the brains of all believers for distributed computation. But no matter how much she distributed the calculations, the final data torrent always converged back onto her single body. It was a level of suffering that surpassed the term self-sacrifice. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't even allow herself to show pain. If she faltered for an instant, the human coalition would collapse. And so she silently, invisibly upheld the lives of every hero fighting on the front lines. While Luminous sustained the lifeline, command was what held the army together. Sheon fought brilliantly on the Western Front, but she still hadn't secured the upper hand. In contrast, Benimaru, who had arrived to support the Eastern Front, radiated fiery confidence. Luminous immediately sensed the change in him. Benimaru's boldness and certainty came from the Soul Corridor. He could feel it. Rimuru-sama had returned. With their leader back, defeat was impossible. As long as Rimuru-sama existed, they would not lose. This absolute belief empowered Benimaru's command. He unified multiple factions, strangers who had no reason to die for one another, and forged them into a single army. Luminous couldn't help but admire him. Convincing people to risk their lives for strangers was extraordinarily difficult, yet Benimaru had achieved it. He was one of the true MVPs of this defense. However, strategy had limits. Absolute power eventually crushed all tactics. When Ivaruj completed her transformation and began to move, Benimaru's tactics neared their breaking point. Despair began to settle across the battlefield once again. And then the signature carefree laughter split the sky. Milim announced that she had finally arrived. Luminous was overjoyed. Milim had regained her senses, meaning they finally had a top-tier combatant capable of directly restraining Ivaraj. Then, one spark of hope lit another. Yuki Kagurazaka, grumbling that he didn't want to be a taxi, nonetheless teleported everyone over. What arrived was nothing less than an all-inclusive reinforcement bundle: the moderate Harlequin Alliance, Demon Lord Leon, Zalario, Emperor Elmesia, and her Magus Legion. For Luminous, though, nothing matched the joy of seeing a particular figure, Hero Chloe. They exchanged a small nod. It was a shared understanding forged across countless timelines. When the two of them stood together, no obstacle was insurmountable. Meanwhile, Veldora sulked loudly, insisting he should have been acknowledged as the most important reinforcement. Luminous ignored him beautifully. With everyone assembled, Luminous approved their deployment. The battle moved into its final formation. Milim, full of excitement, charged toward Ivaraj, with Chloe following right behind. Luminous had complete faith in Chloe's future sight to prevent catastrophe. The strongest spear and the strongest shield, together, they could definitely hold down Ivaraj. Yuki and his team naturally headed to support Mai Furuki. It was the most logical choice. Her front was the most dangerous, and Yuki's adaptable team was the ideal counter to the monster. Finally, Luminous turned to Veldora. She made it clear she had never counted on the evil dragon. Panicking, Veldora insisted he absolutely wasn't trying to slack off, and rushed toward the front line, where Sheon, Ranga, and Gobta were holding off Habataki. Veldora's involvement would be overwhelming. Habataki, no matter how strong, couldn't surpass Veldora. Luminous fully believed this. Though she often got angry at him, she had to admit the truth, that Evil Dragon's power was undeniably real. Leon and Zalario regrouped with their followers and began clearing the cryptid forces across the battlefield. Elmesia and the Magus Legion headed to the collapsing northern front to reinforce the defense line. Luminous continued to channel her resurrection magic with everything she had. Everything seemed to be turning in their favor, until a chill unlike anything she had ever felt ran down her spine. She spun around instantly, and there he was, floating in the sky, wearing a crimson suit, mismatched red-blue eyes shimmering with menace, stood the man who absolutely should have been dead. The Divine Ancestor, Twilight Valentine. Why was Twilight still alive? We knew he attempted to seize Velzard's body earlier, and was one shot by Carrera's judgment bullet. So why had he appeared again? The answer lay in his not to keep all eggs in one basket personality. Twilight had backed up his core not only inside Velzard, but also inside the Genesis grade weapon, Origin Blood, which he had handed to Jahil long ago. When Jahil died, the spear became ownerless, and Twilight used the backup within it to revive himself. Although he no longer possessed his complete immortality, he still held the ultimate skill Lord of Vice, Angra Mine Yu, and a body close to a pseudo-dragon. In earlier episodes we translated it as Lord of Viciousness, but the official term is Lord of Vice. We'll use the correct one here. Facing her father, Luminous didn't hesitate. She drew her blade and unleashed Hinata's finishing move, Melt Slash. Twilight parried it effortlessly. He sighed theatrically, calling her a terrible daughter, and said he needed to discipline her. Luminous had attacked first for one reason. Twilight had just revived. If there was ever a chance, it would be now. Unfortunately, reality was cruel. Their power gap was enormous. Yet, Luminous didn't crumble in despair. She believed in one person, Chloe. If Chloe, with her future sight, hadn't issued a warning, then this was not a dead end. With absolute trust in her friend, Luminous committed herself to a death match. With Luminous pinned down, her resurrection magic faltered, and the battlefield instantly became harsher. But the human coalition did not collapse because Benimaru stepped forward. He issued a cold, correct directive. Everyone needed to mentally prepare for the absence of recovery magic support. No pointless sacrifices allowed. On the Eastern Front, Milim and Chloe had already forced the transformed Ivaraj, back toward the Star Palace to prevent collateral damage. Velgrind, Benimaru, and Hinata held the line. Cryptid generals in humanoid form couldn't threaten them for sure. Benimaru's confidence even influenced Hinata, and once Hinata learned that Rimuru had returned, her heart settled completely. Such was the power of Rimuru. Masayuki also stepped up, announcing that Ivarage's transformed appearance matched the information passed down through Rudra's sister, Lucia. This revelation would affect Milim most, since Ivarage now resembled her own mother. Velgrin reassured him, however, insisting Milim was a strong child. At that moment, the second wave of reinforcements from Urizania arrived. Testarossa, Carrera, Misery, and Rain. 4 primordial demons, bringing overwhelming force. Milim's Big Four, Obera, Carrion, Frey, Midre followed, along with Gabiru, Geld, Moss, and many others. Sue's true body manifested silently at Benimaru's side too. The momentum of the battlefield shifted instantly. Benimaru made a vow. Before Rimuru-sama reached the field, he would keep everyone alive. He also noticed the sudden arrival of that crimson-clad man and quietly began assigning support to aid Luminous. Switching back to Luminous's perspective, her situation was dire. She had lost her resurrection magic support and now faced a stronger than ever Twilight alone. Benimaru's command had secured the rear for her, but their power difference was still hopelessly vast. Twilight spoke gently, yet his words were cruel. He had come to reclaim her power. Luminous did not stand still. She unleashed damned blood, a curse-like attack that used her own blood as a medium and possessed both spiritual and physical properties. An attack that could pierce even Yuki's anti-skill defenses. It didn't scratch Twilight, of course, but Luminous wasn't aiming to damage him. She pretended to retreat, luring him into a magic circle, then detonated her strongest holy magic, disintegration. A pillar of divine light swallowed Twilight whole, the torrent of spirit particles so intense it looked as if it would disintegrate him entirely. Yet, Luminous felt a sudden, overwhelming chill. Something was wrong. Yes, Origin blood was gone. In the next instant, an icy hand gripped her throat. Twilight had regenerated from the corpse of cryptids. As he had said, if the spear existed, he would not die. Strangled and drained of life, Luminous stayed disturbingly calm. She noticed a series of contradictions she couldn't ignore. First was the contradiction of reclaiming power. Twilight didn't lack energy. Taking her life force did nothing for him, so why do it? Second was the mystery of the greatest masterpiece. Luminous was strong, but she wasn't overwhelmingly superior to the others. Not stronger than Jahil, certainly. From a battle standpoint, she didn't qualify as anyone's supreme creation. Third was the matter of forbidden knowledge. Why was she the only one capable of accessing the fantasy library, a realm managed by the voice of the world that should not exist in reality? More unsettling was Twilight's reaction when she demanded to know what he wanted. He looked just confused. He didn't know. He only smiled and said that as long as she died, the reason didn't matter. This detail was horrifying. The Twilight before her, though he held memories and power, lacked his core motive. He was like a puppet running a script. He knew he had to reclaim something, but not why. And in that instant, with death closing in, Luminous finally remembered the sealed truth, the earliest memory from when she was still floating in her incubation fluid, before her ego had even formed. Twilight Valentine, the Divine Ancestor, had looked upon the sleeping life form in the tank with joy. He said he would name her Luminous Valentine, a special gift bestowed upon him by creator god Veldanava himself. From that moment onward, he would be Twilight, and this new life form would be Luminous. And now she finally understood. She wasn't the supreme masterpiece because she was the strongest. She was the greatest masterpiece because she was a vessel, a perfect container Twilight had created to preserve something far more important. All right, that's all for this video. My explanation of the Heaven Tower War was relatively brief. If you're really interested, I still recommend reading the original text. Ultimately, the core of this war, no matter how much the author tried to highlight minor characters, was simply not something those characters could influence. When writing a novel, mentioning them is necessary, because the author has to keep track of every character, but for a summary or a review, we don't need to discuss every detail. There was another reason things felt tricky. We still don't have humanoid designs for Yvaraga's three subordinates, so, honestly, part of me just wanted to avoid describing their battles too much. As for Luminous, what shocked everyone most was the revelation that the name Veldanava bestowed upon the Divine Ancestor was actually Luminous Valentine. And to add a tiny bit of spoiler context here, Veldanava actually gave the Divine Ancestor the full name Luminous Twilight Valentine, which means both Luminous and Twilight were names granted by Veldanava. Of course, we'll explain the full details in the next episode, but this raised a question for me regarding the timeline. We aren't entirely sure when Veldanava created Twilight Valentine, though it should be extremely early, since Twilight was the one who brought species diversity into the world. However, Feldway, maybe Dino, and even DeGruel should all predate Twilight, and DeGruel and Twilight Valentine are besties. So, why did none of them know the Divine Ancestor's full name? That part still feels odd. Still, this twist about the Divine Ancestor's original name was undeniably excellent, and Luminous's arc remains, in my opinion, the central pillar of Chapter 2. The fantasy library was another fascinating detail. Since the Divine Ancestor was designed by Veldanava to access all knowledge archives, does that imply some form of connection with the voice of the world? It's definitely something worth thinking about. And of course, I think everyone already knows what's coming next, the conclusion of the story between Luminous and Twilight, and the truth behind their shared secret and destiny. The next episode would be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.